The first thing that hit me when I stepped into the Skyline Terrace was the light. Golden diffused the kind of glow you only get when someone's paid for a lighting designer to engineer warmth into glass and steel. But it didn't touch me. Not really. My skin stayed cool, the air sharp against my arms as if the room itself knew the applause wasn't for me. Rows of round tables stretched across the ballroom draped in silk cloths so white they almost shimmered. Silverware caught the glow like it was auditioning for its own spotlight. Servers glided between the chairs with trays balanced in practiced hands, champagne bubbling in crystal flutes. The flowers, hydrangeas, and lilies imported weeks in advance towered over every centerpiece, heavy with perfume that clung to the air. It should have felt celebratory. It should have felt like the pinnacle of everything I'd worked toward late nights in labs, stacks of research papers, presentations no one outside academia would ever read. This was supposed to be my gala, too. But the second the microphone crackled and the MC's voice filled the room, I realized whose story was about to be staged. Ladies and gentlemen, the voice boomed, smooth and rehearsed. Please welcome the radiant star of the Hale family, Celine Hale, chairs scraped. Applause thundered. My parents Gregory in his perfectly tailored suit. Noella, with her pearl necklace glowing under the chandeliers, rose from their seats with practiced grace. They clapped with pride so loud it drowned everything else's faces, beaming like they'd won the lottery. Celine glided forward, her gown catching the light like it had been designed for the spotlight itself. Of course it had. The MC paused, letting the room soak in her name, her presence, her practiced wave. And then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "And also, Sophia Hale." The sound shifted applause, yes, but faint. Polite. A smattering of claps scattered across the ballroom like someone had dropped coins on marble. No standing ovation. No chairs scraping back. My parents didn't rise this time. They kept their seats, their hands tapping together, just enough to maintain appearances, their smiles already fixed on Celine. The space between her name and mine felt wider than the ballroom. Celine bathed in golden light, parents glowing at her side. Me left standing half in shadow, the applause cooling around me like it had been rationed. It wasn't just neglect. It was performance. A deliberate choreography of who mattered and who didn't. I kept walking heels, striking the polished floor in a rhythm that sounded louder than the applause itself. Each click echoed against glass and steel, and for a brief second I imagined it drowning out the MC's words. The shallow claps, even Celine's carefully rehearsed laugh. I told myself to breathe, to keep my face steady. And not my. Let the cameras catch the flicker of betrayal. Jonah, my best friend, had his lens trained on the stage, documenting everything. I knew later he'd show me the footage frame by frame, the moment my parents stood tall for Celine, and the moment they stayed seated for me. Receipts. Proof. But in that instant, all I had was the hollow applause, the golden light that skipped over me, and the silence between each clap that seemed to say more than words ever could. That was the moment I understood what this night was. Not celebration, not recognition. It was a reminder staged and choreographed like every other family gathering. Celine Hale was the chosen daughter, the gleaming face for everyone to admire. And I, despite the degree in my hand, despite the years of work, was the background. The footnote, the name skimmed over by a bored announcer. I smiled anyway, because sometimes silence, the kind you choose, carries more weight than applause. Have you ever been forgotten or sidelined by your own family on a day that was supposed to matter? Comment 1 if yes, 0 if not. The flash came first, white blinding, the kind of light that erases shadows for the sake of memory. My cheeks ached from holding the smile too long, my jaw locked in place the way it always did when someone else was holding the camera. Closer, the photographer urged, hands gesturing with practiced impatience. My family leaned in, arranging themselves as if they'd been rehearsing for this tableau their entire lives. My father's cufflink caught the light. Celine's sequined gown gleamed like a beacon, and I wedged into the corner of the frame, tried to steady my breathing. Then I felt it, the gentle press of my mother's arm against mine, her hand guiding my shoulder just slightly, so I'd fit better into the composition. Her perfume arrived a second later, thick and deliberate, that expensive floral blend she never left the house without. The kind of scent that didn't just hover, it invaded. Her lips brushed my ear as though she were whispering encouragement. Anyone looking would think it was maternal, affectionate even. But what she said seared sharper than any camera flash. Smile, Leech. The word slipped in quiet like a scalpel. Not shouted, not even hissed. Whispered with a softness so precise that only I could hear. My head turned slightly, my smile stretching wider because the photographer had just counted 3, 2, and there it was, the burst of light capturing the exact moment my mother's venom slid into my skin disguised as perfume. The photo would show a family beaming, Selene radiant, my father dignified, my mother poised, and me smiling teeth bared in what could almost pass for joy. A frozen moment curated for scrapbooks and Instagram posts destined to be circulated at holiday dinners and charity galas. Proof of harmony. But I knew better. That smile wasn't joy. It was evidence. Another receipt, one only I could decode. Behind the brightness, behind the curated perfection, lay a word meant to cut me down to size. Leech. The irony didn't escape me. I was the one who'd worked part-time jobs to pay for lab fees when the family budget mysteriously couldn't stretch. I was the one who chased internships without connections, who built research that stood on its own. And yet in this family's narrative, I was the dependent one, the parasite the name whispered like a secret blemish. The photographer barely noticed the tension coiled in my shoulders, or the way my nails pressed into the silk fabric of my dress just to keep steady. Perfect, he said, lowering the camera with satisfaction. One more, just in case. One more, as if the first shot hadn't already locked me in place forever. The smile, the whisper, the betrayal encoded into pixels. That photograph would live on mantelpieces, on glossy event programs, on slideshows at future galas. It would outlast the sting of the word itself. A permanent record of me smiling through the insult complicit in my own erasure. I forced myself to stay still, to let the lights wash over me like it didn't matter, like my mother hadn't just branded me in silence. Around us, the gala continued, champagne-poured applause rippled. Selene laughed too loudly at someone's compliment. My parents glowed with the pride they reserved for her. And me? I held the weight of that single word tucked beneath my practiced grin. Leech. A whisper no one else would ever hear, but one I'd carry long after the flowers on the tables wilted, long after the photos circulated. That was the family's gift to me tonight, a legacy not of celebration, but of quiet humiliation sealed in a smile. And still I smiled. Because sometimes the cruelest thing you can do to someone who tries to reduce you is to refuse to shrink. The camera flash didn't just capture a family, it captured my proof. The ballroom had been designed to impress tiered chandeliers, spilling golden light-polished floors, gleaming as if they'd been scrubbed for royalty centerpieces, rising like floral towers on every table. But none of it mattered once I spotted the place cards. Thin rectangles of ivory stock, each letter pressed in gold foil, waiting to assign value. Names weren't just names tonight. They were positions, rankings, silent verdicts etched in calligraphy. I trailed the line of tables with the polite patience expected of me. Heels tapping softly as if I didn't already know where mine would lead. Guests whispered laughter, floated servers, balanced trays of champagne as though the night itself were effortless. And then tucked at the far edge of the room, I found it Sophia Hale. My name sat perched on a card at a table by the swinging kitchen doors. The smell of garlic and seared butter drifted out in uneven gusts each time the door flapped open. The clang of pans, the hiss of steam, the bark of orders. All the sounds of work of labor meant to remain invisible poured into my space. Each metallic crash felt like punctuation underlining exactly where I stood in the Hale hierarchy. The chair scraped faintly as I pulled it back, careful not to trip the server rushing past with a tray of soup. From my seat, I could see everything, waiters weaving like dancers through the aisles, chefs shouting in staccato rhythm behind the swinging doors. And beyond them, at the glowing center of the ballroom, the table that mattered. There sat Selene. Her place card wasn't just set at the central table, it was positioned directly between my parents, as if she were the bridge connecting them, the crown jewel in their staged portrait. A halo of chandelier light framed her sequins on her gown, scattering sparks in every direction. She didn't just sit at the table. She owned it, her laughter rolling easily over the white linen like it belonged there. and my parents leaned in, every nod and every smile reinforcing the orbit that kept her at the center. From the corner, my vantage point offered no such glow. I had shadows and noise, a symphony of clattering pans that punctured every attempt at polite conversation with the strangers seated beside me. Distant relatives, acquaintances whose names blurred before dessert. This was the table for extras. For the faces meant to fill the room, but not the photographs. I pressed my fingertips against the edge of my card, tracing the letters as though to confirm they were real. The golden ink gleamed under the weak spill of light from the kitchen doors. My name, my identity, wedged between a fire exit and a waft of garlic steam. The applause swelled again at the central table as Celine raised her glass. My parents mirrored her gesture, eyes locked on her with admiration that glowed brighter than the chandeliers. I sipped from the water glass in front of me, the clatter of dishes behind me, louder than any toast I might have given. It wasn't the first time I'd been placed at the margins. Childhood birthday parties, where Celine's cake towered 3 tiers while mine was a single round. Holiday dinners where my chair ended up at the corner, squeezed between an uncle's elbow and a stack of coats. But this was different. This was supposed to be my night. 2. My degree, my effort, my place at the table. And still, here I was, set aside, boxed in by the kitchen doors, a reminder that in this family's carefully curated stage, my role was support staff. A server pushed past, nearly tipping his tray over my shoulder, muttering an apology too rushed to mean anything. The steam carried another wave of garlic, stinging my eyes. Across the room, Celine's laughter rippled, smooth and deliberate, crafted for the microphones that had been discreetly set near the central table. Every camera in the room faced her, every angle chosen to crown her presence. I sat back, spine-straight, hands folded around the linen napkin in my lap. If this was the place they gave me, I would not shrink inside it. The clang of pans and hiss of oil became my background music, the draft of kitchen air my reminder of the reality Celine's spotlight could never erase. Receipts don't always come in the form of paper or photos. Sometimes they come as seating charts, as place cards slipped onto tables no one bothers to photograph. Tonight my proof was right there in gold lettering, Sophia Hale, table by the kitchen. And someday that receipt would matter more than the chandelier glow. The magazine lay flat on the marble table, its glossy surface catching the chandelier light and reflecting it like a mirror made to mock me. At first glance, it looked beautiful. Sleek typography. A photograph staged in that perfect balance of power and grace, and the headline splashed across the top, Celine Hale leading the way in environmental innovation. My stomach dropped before I even turned the page. I knew those words, that language. I'd written them in drafts in grant applications, in reports that sat ignored until suddenly, miraculously, they'd found a new life with Celine's name attached. I flipped through the spread, each page opening like a wound. There it was, the project I had poured myself into for a year. Late nights in the lab, long hours gathering data in fields, no one wanted to stand in endless edits, refining every graph and figure until the story held weight. Only now the story didn't belong to me. The photos showed Celine smiling against backdrops she had never visited, solar arrays glinting in the sun, wetlands stretching into the horizon. Her hands rested delicately on props she had touched only once during a quick visit when cameras were present. The article described her as the visionary spearheading a new wave of sustainable solutions. My name didn't appear. Not in the byline, not in the acknowledgments, not even buried in the fine print. A friend of the family approached magazine already folded to the center spread. Her smile was warm, but the words landed sharp. Your sister is brilliant, Sophia. To be doing work like this at her age, you must be so proud. Pride. The word tasted bitter. I nodded, forcing a smile that didn't belong to me. Yes, I said, my voice steady, quiet, rehearsed. She's very good at performing. The woman chuckled, mistaking my tone for modesty. She tapped the page as if to anchor her praise. It must run in the family. Then she drifted away, leaving me alone with the evidence of theft. I stared down at the spread again. My graphs recolored, reformatted. My conclusions summarized into digestible quotes attributed to Celine. Even the title of the initiative one I had chosen carefully to emphasize community involvement had been reshaped into a catchphrase better suited for branding. The precision, the hours, the sacrifice, it had all been siphoned, polished, and repackaged into Selena's halo. Across the room, Celine basked in the attention. Copies of the magazine fluttered in people's hands as they approached her, praising her brilliance, congratulating her foresight. She accepted every word with that graceful tilt of her head, the smile that could belong to a saint or a thief who'd learned how to shine in borrowed light. My parents glowed too, standing at her side like proud benefactors. My father's arm rested lightly at her back, my mother's hand adjusting the fold of her gown just so. They knew the truth. They had seen the drafts stacked on my desk, the field notes cluttering my kitchen table, the late-night exhaustion etched on my face. And still they chose this narrative, this version of reality, because it fit the image they wanted the world to see. I folded the magazine closed, the glossy cover bending under my grip. It wasn't rage, I felt it was something colder. A clarity that cut deeper than anger. Celine hadn't just stolen my work. She had stolen my place. And the applause thundering across the ballroom proved that for now, the world believed her version. But I believed in receipts. The drafts still sat on my laptop, each version marked with timestamps. The field notes bore my handwriting ink smudged by rain. The grant applications carried my name. My signature? My effort. Evidence doesn't vanish just because someone else smiles in front of a camera. Evidence waits. So I let Celine have her night. I let her sparkle under the lights, let her soak in the applause that belonged to someone else. Because while the room saw brilliance, I saw a ledger. A record of theft dressed as achievement. And when the time came, I knew exactly what I'd show them. The clinking of cutlery had slowed the hum of conversation, dipping into a lull that always seemed to invite performance. My mother, as if sensing the silence needed filling, straightened in her chair. The pearls at her throat caught the chandelier light gleaming with the same polished precision as the smile she wore. Her glass of wine hovered delicately in her hand, her voice carrying across the table without ever sounding raised. You know, she began in that practiced tone that pretends to be offhand. Sophia nearly got expelled once. For skipping all those mandatory seminars. The room shifted. Heads turned, forks paused mid-air. A few polite chuckles slipped out as though they weren't sure if it was meant to be a joke. The heat climbed into my cheeks, but I kept my hands steady, folded around the linen napkin in my lap. My mother sipped her wine, eyes twinkling with the satisfaction of someone who had delivered both a story and a sentence. It wasn't the first time she had done it. Dropped a narrative like a stone in the center of the table, sending ripples of humiliation outward until the whole room shifted away from me. She knew the art of the casual reveal, the kind that stains a reputation without anyone daring to wipe the mark away. I let the pause linger, let the silence stretch just enough to register before I smiled. Not wide, not defensive, just steady. Actually, I said my voice, even that, was a faculty-sponsored exchange program. The department covered every expense. The dean himself signed the papers. The words landed flat. No laughter, no gasps, no acknowledgement. My mother's smile didn't falter, but she didn't meet my eyes either. She simply swirled her wine as though the correction had been a breeze she could brush past. Around the table, I caught at the shuffle of discomfort, the flicker of glances. My uncle reached for his glass a little too quickly. A cousin tapped at her phone, pretending distraction. Even the waiter refilling water glasses kept his eyes fixed on the stemware rather than the scene unfolding inches from him. No one contradicted her. No one supported me. They didn't need to. The damage was already done. In the economy of family storytelling, the first version always counts more than the correction. People remember the scandal, not the clarification. I leaned back in my chair, the smile still fixed on my lips, though my chest burned. I had learned this dance long ago. My mother would drop a seed of humiliation, and the silence of others would let it grow roots. By dessert, her version would be the one people repeated in whispers. Did you hear Sophia nearly got expelled? A rumor polished into fact, preserved like crystal under the glow of chandeliers. Celine laughed softly, the kind of laugh meant to smooth over tension but sharpen it instead. My father cleared his throat, pretending to signal for the next course, his eyes sliding away from mine. They weren't going to save me, not from this, not from her. So I saved myself. I straightened folding the napkin once more with deliberate precision and let my voice cut through the clatter of dishes leaving the kitchen. It's funny, I said lightly, how stories change depending on who's telling them. Good thing I keep records. A few eyes flicked back toward me, curious, uncertain, but quickly darted away again. No one wanted to stand between a mother's tale and a daughter's truth. But the words were out there now, and I knew Jonah's camera positioned discreetly near the edge of the ballroom had captured the moment. My correction. My proof. The rest of the dinner pressed on as though nothing had happened. Conversation rerouted to safer topics. Laughter forced a little louder. But I felt the tremor under the tablecloth, the fault line opening just a little wider with every fabricated word my mother tried to pass as fact. This was the Hale Method rewrite performer race. And this was mine record preserve weight. Because lies age poorly when receipts exist. The lights dimmed and a hush fell across the ballroom. A soft piano track began to play through the speakers, sentimental and carefully chosen, the kind of music designed to make people nostalgic before the first image even appeared. My chest tightened. I already knew what was coming. The projector flickered and the slideshow began. Childhood photos, vacations by the sea, birthday cakes stacked with candles. The kind of curated family history that always felt less like memory and more like marketing. The screen glowed with smiles, laughter, moments frozen in time. But something else glowed too, the absence. In photo after photo, I wasn't there. Or rather, I had been there once. But now cropped out. A hand cut at the wrist where I'd been standing. A shadow that no one acknowledged. Even when the frame was wide enough to hold me, the edit had narrowed, reshaping the story until I was invisible. Laughter bubbled up from tables around the room as the images played. Oh, I remember that trip someone called. Celine looked like a star, even back then, another gushed. The slideshow did its job painting Celine as the golden child, the shining constant in every family story. Then it landed the graduation photo. I held my breath as the image filled the screen. The auditorium stage, the banner stretched across the back, the moment I had dreamed of for years. I remembered standing there in my cap and gown, sweat damp at my collar. Relief and pride thrumming through my body as I clutched the diploma. My moment. But on the screen, it wasn't mine. The photo showed Celine standing center stage holding the diploma as if it belonged to her. My diploma. The cropping was seamless, almost artful. I had been erased entirely. No trace of me remained. The caption beneath read, "Celine, our star." The room erupted in applause as if this were the pinnacle of the evening. My parents smiled proudly, my mother dabbing at her eyes like she was overcome with emotion. My father's hand rested on Celine's shoulder in the photograph, but in reality, he patted her arm now as though to confirm the slideshow's truth. I sat frozen. The edges of the table pressed into my palms as I gripped it hard enough to leave marks. My diploma, my years, my sweat reassigned with a keystroke and a crop tool. They hadn't just edited the photo. They had edited the story, rewriting the past in front of 100 witnesses. For a heartbeat, I thought about standing about shouting the truth, about demanding they look closer. But I knew how it would sound, bitter, jealous, ungrateful. Celine's smile glowed too brightly under the projection for anyone to believe otherwise. So I stayed seated. But I didn't stay silent inside. Because I wasn't without proof. The original photo lived on my phone, time-stamped, metadata intact. The diploma sat in my apartment, my name in bold ink, sealed and stamped by the university. Evidence doesn't vanish just because someone edits the slideshow. And Jonah, quiet, steady, Jonah was already recording his camera lens, reflecting the flicker of each false frame. The piano track swelled as the slideshow faded to black. The applause rose again, a wave that carried Celine higher. I clapped too, but each strike of my hands was deliberate, measured not in celebration, but in record. Every false image, every stolen moment, it was all part of the ledger. As the lights rose again, Celine stood to wave her gown, shimmering like a curtain call. My parents glowed beside her, radiant with pride. Around me, relatives nodded, murmuring admiration. None of them looked at me. None of them noticed the shadow still seated at the edge of the room. But shadows have a way of proving the light isn't whole. If you were erased from your own celebration, cropped out of the photos, your achievements reassigned, would you stay silent or would you speak up? Comment below. Crystal chimed against crystal sharp and deliberate, echoing through the vaulted room like a command rather than a celebration. My father rose from his chair with the kind of composure that belonged to a stage actor rather than a parent. Every eye turned toward him as if summoned conversations dissolving mid-sentence forks lowered in obedient silence. He adjusted his cufflinks, small unnecessary gestures that carried the authority of ritual, and lifted his glass until the chandelier's glow danced along its rim. This evening, he declared voice smooth as polished marble is not merely a party. It is a testament to commitment to what family must sometimes endure for one another. Heads tilted with anticipation, guests leaning forward, waiting for the inevitable anecdote that would draw their admiration. His words unfurled, slowly measured confident. Then came the strike, delivered with perfect timing. We have poured tens of thousands into Sophia's education. Tuition living costs endless expenses. We carried the weight gladly for her future. The statement sliced the air with a precision colder than any knife. Polite sighs rippled through the tables. A woman dabbed at her eyes as if moved by his nobility. Someone whispered to a neighbor, and the neighbor nodded, lips pursed in solemn respect. A narrative had been dropped into the room like dye and water, spreading instantly, tinting every glance that drifted toward me. I lifted my water glass, the condensation damp against my palm, and swallowed slowly. Not in salute, never in agreement, but as anchor. The liquid steadied me cool against the heat rising in my chest. Their applause might drown me if I didn't hold something firm, because I knew the truth. Scholarship letters embossed with my name still rested in a folder at home. Research grants approved after months of drafting sat archived in my files. Pay stubs from endless shifts, my handwriting marking tips and margins proved how I paid for rent meals, even books. The memory of tutoring freshmen until midnight while my classmates went out dancing was burned into my bones. I had carried myself. Every receipt testified to it. Yet here he was rewriting my ledger in public, transforming my discipline into dependency, my diligence into debt. The applause became another layer of confirmation, embedding his fiction into collective memory. A toast is never innocent. It cements a story, seals it with glass and echo. I scanned the room, hunting for one sign of hesitation. Celine leaned forward, her smile polished, radiant, pleased not only by her own spotlight, but by the shadow now cast over me. My mother nodded solemnly beside my father, her hand resting on the stem of her glass like a benediction. Relatives clinked glasses, eager to be included in the mythology of sacrifice. Not one pair of eyes lingered on me. Not one person asked whether his numbers added up. Looking at them was like looking at a gallery of portraits all painted in the same colors: admiration, deference, silence. Inside, the words pierced deeper than any champagne bubble could soften. I thought of the nights I staggered home from the cafe uniform still smelling of espresso and burnt sugar. I thought of the grants I filled out line by line, my handwriting cramping as I chased funding to patch what my family refused to provide. I thought of the diploma folded in my desk drawer, proof that I had earned every inch of ground on my own. And yet in one polished speech, my father had swept it all away. The clapping subsided, glasses lowered, laughter returned, chatter bloomed again as if nothing monumental had transpired. But I knew what had shifted. His words had carved a scar into the narrative of me. A scar that would travel with every guest when they repeated it later, Sophia, the one her parents carried. I stayed seated, my glass of water untouched, now the condensation pooling into a small circle on the white linen. I didn't interrupt. Didn't fight for the floor because I understood their rules too well. To protest in that moment would only feed the lie, paint me as defensive, ungrateful. But silence chosen deliberately is not surrender. It is storage. And I was already storing this, cataloging the scene like every other falsehood. Because what he offered tonight wasn't a toast. It was evidence. And evidence ages differently when the records still exist. The room hummed with the sound of forks against porcelain glasses clinking faintly as servers cleared plates. Conversation swelled again, laughter spilling into the air like nothing had happened, as if my father's toast about phantom debts were nothing more than another course on the menu. But inside me, something colder had settled. Not rage, not even hurt. Something sharper. Calculation. I didn't argue. I didn't rise to defend myself. I simply sat, spine-straight lips pressed into the faintest smile, and began recording silently in the only ledger that mattered my memory. Each humiliation, each cut, each falsification was its own entry. The cropped photos on the slideshow where my face had been trimmed away until Celine's image stood alone. The whispered smile leech from my mother as the camera flash froze me into a permanent performance. The fabricated story of nearly being expelled delivered across the dinner table as if fact. The invented debt my father claimed to have carried. Each moment, another stone stacked, another receipt stored. It was a quiet catalog, invisible to the room, but vivid in my mind. I repeated their words silently, embedding them line by line as if rehearsing testimony for an audience not yet present. My hands folded neatly in my lap, but beneath the stillness was movement, pages turning ink-scratching records being kept where no one could see. And then I caught it. Across the ballroom, beyond the gleam of the chandeliers and the orbit of Celine's admirers. Aunt Clara's gaze. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't clapping. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, cut through the staged performance as if she were the only one awake in a room full of actors asleep in their roles. Our eyes locked, and in that quiet second, the noise around us seemed to dim. She tilted her head almost imperceptibly and gave the smallest nod. It wasn't approval. It wasn't pity. It was a signal. Remember? Record? Wait. The words weren't spoken, but I heard them as clearly as if she'd whispered them into my ear. Clara had always been different from the others, too shrewd to be seduced by Celine's glitter, too experienced to be fooled by my parents' curated facade. She kept files, contracts, receipts of her own. And she recognized the act of someone else doing the same. I inhaled slowly, letting the moment settle. Yes. That was the work. Not protest in the moment, not flailing against a machine designed to erase me. It was patience, documentation, choosing silence not because I had no words, but because I knew timing was its own kind of evidence. The chatter rose again around me, laughter, clinking glasses, compliments tossed toward Celine like confetti. My parents leaned closer to her, their profiles gleaming under the lights, the very picture of familial pride. To anyone else, this was a celebration. To me, it was a ledger filling line by line. Celine's laughter rang out high and sharp as someone complimented her environmental leadership. My fingers tightened slightly around the napkin in my lap. I didn't correct it. I didn't need to. Because while she collected applause, I was collecting proof. The doors to the kitchen swung open again, the clang of pans and hiss of steam flooding my corner of the room. No one paid attention, but to me it felt like punctuation, each crash underlining the falseness of the spectacle before me. The truth had a sound, even if only I heard it. Across the room, Clara's eyes hadn't moved. Her nod lingered in my mind like a signature at the bottom of a contract. Keep the record. Choose the moment. I sipped my water steady, unhurried, as though nothing had shifted. But inside, something had. Their lies weren't ephemeral anymore. They were archived. Every crop, every whisper, every toast. Preserved in silence now, but waiting. Because silence, when deliberate, is not the absence of speech. It is preparation. And I was preparing. The ballroom buzzed with movement as dessert plates were cleared and guests shifted in their seats. Conversation weaving in and out like threads of a tapestry. I slipped from my chair by the kitchen doors, weaving my way toward the center aisle. My pulse matched the rhythm of my steps, steady but taut like a drumline echoing beneath the polished surface of the evening. I didn't plan on making a scene. Not yet, but I wanted to move closer to study the tableau they'd constructed under the chandeliers, the family portrait in motion. My parents basking in Celine's glow, the applause still orbiting her like a satellite. Every step reminded me of the records I was already keeping, of the catalog Aunt Clara's nod had urged me to build. That's when I felt it. A hand closed around mine, cool, firm, deceptively gentle. My mother's grip. She had risen from her chair without a sound, sliding into my path with the fluid grace of someone used to staging interventions in public without ever calling attention. To the room, it looked affectionate, a mother catching her daughter's hand, smiling, guiding. But her fingers, pressed harder than affection, required each knuckle rigid with intent. Her face, tilted toward my lips, curved into a smile so convincing it could have been carved from porcelain. The kind of smile that had soothed donors, charmed colleagues, and diffused whispers for decades. But beneath it, her voice slipped into my ear low and certain, the kind of whisper that doesn't need volume to wound. "Don't make a scene," she said. "You'll regret it." The perfume clinging to her collar pressed against me again, suffocatingly. Sweet a scent I now associated less with elegance than with erasure. The pressure of her hand was no longer just a grip, it was a command disguised as touch. To anyone watching, we were a picture of maternal affection. To me, it was warning threat manipulation. For a moment, I let the silence stretch, measuring the weight of her words. Regret. As if truth was shameful. As if exposing their performance was more disgraceful than the performance itself. I lifted my chin just slightly enough to meet her eyes. The porcelain mask didn't crack, but I caught the faintest flicker, the calculation behind her smile, the cold ledger she carried of what appearances cost. My reply came softer than hers, but sharp enough to cut through her grip. "A scene," I whispered. "It's not a scene if it's the truth. It's only the truth under light." Her smile tightened, the lines at the corners of her mouth deepening like fractures in stone. Her grip tightened too, as if she could hold the words back inside me, as if fingers could erase resolve. But I didn't pull away. I let her hold on. Let her feel the stillness in my hand, the refusal to shrink. Around us, guests laughed, oblivious. Silver forks scraped porcelain, a waiter's tray clattered faintly against the door to the kitchen. Life continued, staged and smooth. No one saw the grip, no one heard the exchange. It was private theater in the middle of public spectacle. Finally, she released me her hand, slipping back as though nothing had happened. The smile never faltered. She brushed an imaginary wrinkle from my sleeve, patted my arm, and returned to her seat beside Celine, her performance uninterrupted. But something had changed. The warning was logged, recorded in the same ledger as the crop, the whisper, the toast, the lie. Another receipt. Another entry. I stood still for a beat longer, letting the chandelier light wash over me. She thought she had reminded me of consequences. What she didn't realize was that her grip, her words, had only confirmed what I already knew, that silence had never been my prison. It was my preparation. A scene. Yes, but not chaos. Not embarrassment. A scene, when it came, would be nothing more than illumination. The truth revealed in front of witnesses. Light cast where shadows had been carefully arranged. I smoothed the napkin in my hand, exhaled slowly, and stepped forward again. Her warning still echoed in my ear, but beneath it, louder, clearer, came my own certainty. The truth doesn't ask permission. And when it arrives, no grip can hold it back. The air inside the ballroom had shifted. It wasn't just the weight of chandeliers or the clatter of silverware against porcelain. It was the accumulation of unspoken things. The layering of small lies that thickened the atmosphere until even breathing felt like work. I stood near the edge of the tables, still steadying myself after my mother's grip, her words lingering like smoke. Around me, the performance went on. Selene laughing brightly. My father basking in borrowed admiration. My mother whispering praise into eager ears. I thought I was alone in it, cataloging quietly until I noticed her. Aunt Clara. She rose from her seat near the far corner of the room with the ease of someone who never needed to announce her presence. Her movements were deliberate, graceful, unhurried. No one paid much attention. Clara had perfected the art of existing just outside the spotlight. That was her power. She had seen more truths in the shadows than anyone else dared to look at. She crossed the floor slowly, her heels making the faintest clicks against the polished wood like a metronome, keeping time against the rhythm of the gala. When she reached me, she didn't speak. She didn't even pause long enough for others to notice. Her hand slipped toward mine, practiced, discreet, and then I felt it an envelope. The paper was thick, the edges pressed firm against my palm. She slid it into my hand as if she were passing me nothing more than a folded napkin. The gesture was so natural that anyone watching would have missed it entirely. But the weight in my hand told a different story. "Keep this," she murmured so low it could have been mistaken for a sigh. I curled my fingers around it instinctively, shielding it from view. The envelope was unmarked plain, but even before I opened it, I knew what it contained. Clara's nod from earlier, the silent reminder to record weight. Choose the moment. This was the moment's companion. I slipped the envelope quickly into my clutch, sliding the clasp shut as the music swelled again. My pulse raced, but not from fear. From recognition. Inside, I could almost see it, the scholarship award letters, my name etched in ink, official seals gleaming faintly in scanned copies. The research grants, signatures of faculty who vouched for my work. Pay stubs from the cafe tips recorded in my own handwriting. Documentation of every hour, every sacrifice, every piece of evidence that I had carried myself. Proof? The kind of proof no slideshow crop or false toast could erase. I looked up, meeting Clara's eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her expression was steady, sharp, as if to say, "Now you are no longer empty-handed. Now when they perform their erasure, you hold the record they can't burn." She turned and walked back toward her seat, sliding seamlessly into conversation, as if she had merely excused herself to adjust a shawl. No one noticed the transfer. No one suspected the ledger had shifted. But I noticed. For the first time that night, my hands didn't feel bare. For hours, I had sat through their manipulations, their curated narrative stripped of acknowledgement, positioned by the kitchen doors, silenced by fabricated debts. Every time I tried to breathe, it was as if they reminded me I had nothing tangible to counter them with, only memory, only presence, only silence. But now I had more than silence. The envelope pressed lightly against the side of my clutch, a weight so small yet immense. My shoulders eased slightly, the tightness in my jaw loosening. I wasn't imagining the ledger anymore. I was carrying it. Pages and ink timestamps and signatures, tangible records of everything they had tried to erase. Celine stood at the center of the room again, another wave of applause rising around her as a guest praised her extraordinary leadership. My parents glowed with her as though every cheer was proof of their perfect architecture. And for once, I didn't feel the same hollow sting. Because applause is sound. It fades. Paper, though, paper endures. I rested my hand lightly on the clutch in my lap, grounding myself in its presence. The evening continued around me, glittering, loud, oblivious. But beneath the performance, something had shifted. I wasn't the girl with empty hands anymore. I wasn't the erased figure in cropped photos or the burden rewritten in false speeches. I was the archivist now. I leaned back in my chair, my lips curving into a smile that no one understood. To them, it looked polite, perfunctory. To me, it was a seal of vow. Their stage lights might wash me out, but I carried proof that would outlast them all. Clara had given me more than an envelope. She had given me the weapon they feared most, the truth documented and undeniable. And in that moment, for the first time that night, I didn't feel cornered. I felt ready. The ballroom pulsed with music again, strings and piano weaving a sentimental rhythm meant to distract. Guests clinked forks against plates of dessert. Celine, still holding court at the center table, laughter circling her like a crown. From the outside, it was flawless. But Jonah caught my eye across the room. His camera dangled against his chest lens cap on posture casual. To anyone else, he looked like another guest fiddling with equipment. But I knew him better than that. He tilted his head toward the far corridor, the narrow hallway that led to the service wing of the terrace. Then he slipped away as quiet as smoke. I followed moments later, my hand grazing the edge of the clutch where Clara's envelope rested, steadying me with its weight. The hallway was dimmer lined with framed photographs of past galas and smiling dignitaries. The noise from the ballroom dulled into a muffled hum, replaced by the sharper sound of voices leaking through a cracked door. Jonah stood pressed against the wall, one finger raised for silence, his other hand angling the camera just enough toward the opening. His eyes met mine, steady, serious. I moved closer, my back against the cool plaster, heart thudding as the words on the other side bled through. My father's voice calm but edged with impatience. "Just make sure she drinks it." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. My breath caught and I leaned closer. The gap in the doorway revealed nothing but shadows, but the tone was unmistakable. This wasn't performance for donors, this was command. Then my mother's voice followed, smooth, practiced, delivered as though she were arranging flowers instead of orchestrating harm. It will only look like she fainted. Nothing more. My pulse spiked. The perfume I'd smelled clinging to her hours earlier seemed to choke me anew. Their plan wasn't humiliation anymore, it was containment. Erasure in flesh and blood. And then another voice joined, softer, conspiratorial. Marin Stroud, the event planner, distant relative, always floating around the edges of family gatherings, clipboard in hand, smile polite. "I'll cue it during the toast," she whispered. "When the glasses rise." My stomach dropped. A toast. Public irreversible, staged like everything else tonight. Jonah's camera light blinked red, silent but alive. He was recording every syllable. He didn't look at me, didn't need to. His hands were steady, his breathing, even the way it always was when he knew evidence mattered more than outrage. I pressed my palm against the clutch again, grounding myself in its contents. The scholarship papers, the grants. The pay stubs, they had felt like protection before. Proof of who I was. But this was survival. Through the door, the voices fell into silence. Footsteps shuffled, papers rustled. Jonah pulled back, lowering the camera, eyes sharp. We stayed frozen until the sound of heels clicking against marble receded into the ballroom. Only then did I exhale, the breath escaping like steam. "They're planning it," Jonah whispered finally, voice barely audible. "You heard?" I nodded. My throat felt raw, but the words came anyway. "They think truth is theater. They think they can script even this." He tapped the side of his camera, expression grim. Then we let the world see the rehearsal. The hallway swallowed our silence, broken only by the muffled laughter spilling faintly from the ballroom again. I thought of my father's toast, my mother's whispers, the slideshow erasure, the warning grip. Every piece had been meant to weaken me, to box me in. And now this final act, a staged collapse rewritten as weakness. But they hadn't accounted for Jonah. For the lens that never blinked. For the envelope now pressed against my ribs. For the catalog I had been building all night. I stepped away from the door, the echo of my heels louder than before. My reflection caught briefly in one of the framed photographs, smiling faces of people, long gone, staged moments preserved forever. But I wasn't smiling. My eyes were clear, fixed, steady. "They'll raise their glasses," I said softly, more to myself than to Jonah. "And when they do, the truth will already be pouring." Jonah didn't answer. He didn't have to. The red light on his camera blinked again, silent as a heartbeat but steady. Evidence gathering itself, waiting for the moment the stage lights could no longer hide the script. We walked back toward the glow of the ballroom, the hum of music swelling louder with each step. My parents' voices had blended again into the chatter, their smiles polished, their masks unbroken. But I knew what lingered beneath what words had already been recorded, what proof now existed beyond their reach. And for the first time that night, their power didn't feel infinite. It felt fragile. Because the truth had ears. And the truth was listening. The chandeliers dimmed again as servers drifted through the room with their silver trays, crystal stems sparkling in neat rows. A hush spread as glasses of champagne were placed before each guest, bubbles climbing in golden streams toward the rim. The toast was coming. The room seemed to vibrate with anticipation, a collective breath held in one glittering pause. I felt it before I saw it, the shift in my father's posture. He leaned slightly forward, fingers resting too deliberately near my place setting. His cufflink flashed as he adjusted the fork beside my plate, the gesture casual enough to look like absent fussing. But it wasn't casual. His hand dipped his thumb, pressing against the base of the flute, and something small, almost invisible, fell into the champagne. The surface rippled, a brief disturbance lost under the play of bubbles. My stomach tightened. Jonah's lens caught the movement steady from across the room, the red light blinking as he recorded. My mother didn't glance up. Didn't break her smile, but her hand stilled on her napkin. Celine laughed at something a guest whispered, oblivious or pretending to be. The glass sat in front of me, the pale gold liquid shimmering in the chandelier glow. I didn't touch it, didn't flinch. My pulse slowed instead of quickening clarity, sharpening until every detail of the room seemed outlined in silver. I rose slowly, careful not to startle clutch steady in my hand. Every head near me turned slightly, expecting perhaps that I was about to excuse myself. But I didn't leave. I walked toward the central table, toward the circle of applause orbiting Celine. She looked up, her eyes bright, a smile already curving. The kind of smile you learn when you believe every stage belongs to you. My parents' gazes followed me. My father's fingers tightening around his own glass. My mother's pearls catching the light as she adjusted them. I stopped at Celine's side, my own glass in hand. My voice, when it came, was light, steady-edged, with a humor the room was eager to accept. "It looks like I may have taken your glass by mistake," I said, tilting it just enough for the light to catch. "This one belongs to you." For a second, silence. Then Celine laughed, head tilting, just so her sequined gown scattering light across the table. "Oh, you always mix things up, Sophia?" She teased, her tone warm enough to disguise condescension. Without hesitation, she reached for the glass, sliding her own toward me in exchange. To the guests, it was nothing but a playful sibling moment, a harmless swap. Chuckles rose around us, someone murmured, "sisters," and the tension dissipated into amusement. Cameras flashed, capturing the stage spontaneity as though it were part of the evening's entertainment. But beneath the laughter, something darker shifted. My father's jaw tightened just barely. My mother's smile faltered for half a second before smoothing again. Marin's hand twitched at her side, the clipboard she always carried now suddenly heavy. I lifted the glass Celine had given me, now safely untouched, and smiled back. "See," I said softly enough that only she could hear. "We wouldn't want the wrong person drinking the wrong thing." Her laughter wavered. Just for a beat. But the room didn't notice. To them, it was a harmless exchange, another layer of Hale family charm. Applause broke again as my father raised his glass high, covering the fissure with ceremony. To family, he declared, his voice smooth, authoritative, rehearsed. Glasses lifted all around, the golden champagne shimmering in unison. Celine raised hers too, her smile back in place, but her hand lingered a second longer on the stem, eyes flickering toward me, as if something had shifted she couldn't quite name. I touched the rim of mine to my lips, but didn't drink. Not yet. Across the room, Jonah's camera blinked again, a silent witness. The envelope in my clutch pressed steady against my side, another weight, reminding me that the ledger was filling line by line. The toast concluded, laughter spilled. The music swelled once more. The danger had been diverted, transformed into spectacle. To everyone else, the glass switch was nothing more than a sibling joke, a fleeting anecdote they'd retell with a smile. But to me, it was a pivot. A proof that I could turn their choreography back on itself. I returned to my seat, calmly letting the golden light wash over me. My hands didn't tremble. My pulse didn't race. I had carried their humiliation all evening, crops, whispers, lies, fabrications. But this time, I hadn't just endured. I had reversed it quietly, deliberately, in full view of everyone who would never know what they had just witnessed. It wasn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was preservation. A record in motion. A truth disguised as a joke. And it was only the beginning. If you were in my place, would you have dared to switch the glasses and flip the performance on its head? Comment 1 for yes, 0 for no. The music swelled again as Vela, one of my parents' oldest friends and a frequent guest at these carefully curated galas, tapped her fork gently against her glass. The chime rippled through the room, silencing chatter, drawing every head toward her table. Her voice, light and theatrical, rose above the hush. To the Hale family, she declared pillars of grace, achievement, and legacy. May their daughters carry forward the brilliance we celebrate tonight. Applause scattered across the room, warm and dutiful. Glasses lifted. The golden glow of champagne shimmered beneath the chandeliers, a sea of liquid stars raised in tribute. Celine's smile widened, her sequined gown throwing sparks as she leaned forward, glass poised higher than anyone else's. She loved these moments when all eyes fixed on her as though she were both jewel and crown. She drank deep. The bubbles caught the light as she tilted the glass, her throat working in steady swallows. She always overperformed, even in gestures. A sip wasn't enough when a dramatic gulp could seize attention. The rim of the flute touched her lips longer than anyone else's. She set it down with a little flourish, laughter spilling easily as if the toast had been written just for her. For a moment, the room returned to its rhythm, applause, fading, waiters moving with trays, conversations beginning again. But then the shift came. Small at first. Celine blinked once, twice, her hand brushing at her temple as though a sudden dizziness had passed through her. She laughed again, higher, pitched a touch, delayed eyes darting briefly toward my parents. My father clapped a guest on the shoulder, too quickly, too stiffly. My mother's hand lingered on her pearls, twisting the strand once, twice, the way she always did when calculation overtook composure. Celine reached for her glass again, but missed her fingers, grazing the stem, knocking it sideways. Champagne sloshed onto the linen, soaking into the silk runner. Her chair scraped against the polished floor as she tried to steady herself. Then the collapse. Her knees buckled as if someone had pulled the strings from beneath her. She caught the edge of the table, fingers clawing at the linen, dragging silverware with her as her body crumpled downward. Forks clattered, plates shifted, a centerpiece of lilies tilted dangerously. Gasps shot through the room, sharp intakes of breath that echoed louder than the music. Guests surged forward, chairs scraping, a flurry of voices rising at once. "Celine, is she all right? Call someone." The sound tangled into chaos. My parents moved instantly, almost too quickly. My father knelt at her side, slipping into the role of protective patriarch. "She's fainted," he announced, his voice projecting calm authority, even as the edge of panic bled through. My mother dropped gracefully to her knees beside them, one hand fluttering uselessly against Selena's arm, the other dabbing at her own eyes with a linen napkin. "Oh, our poor girl." She cried, pitch perfect, every syllable tuned for sympathy. But I saw it. The flicker in their eyes, the crack in the masks, fear sharp and unguarded flashing through the performance. My father's hand pressed harder against Celine's shoulder than comfort required. My mother's gaze darted once, just once, toward me. It wasn't accusation. It wasn't grief. It was recognition. The choreography had broken, and for the first time, they couldn't script the scene. Celine moaned faintly, her sequins catching the light from the floor, now her crown slipping sideways as the cameras clicked frantically. Guests shouted for doctors, for staff, for help. A server rushed past with water, another with a phone already pressed to their ear. The gala had fractured into panic, the elegance of the evening collapsing with Celine's body. And me, I stood still. My glass untouched in my hand, the liquid inside catching the chandelier's reflection unbroken. Jonah's camera blinked steadily across the room, capturing every second: the toast, the glass, the collapse, the staged concern that followed. Evidence. Always. Evidence. I didn't rush forward, didn't kneel, didn't play the role of worried sister. The performance belonged to them now. My place was the ledger, the witness, the one who knew what had been slipped into a glass and who had chosen to drink it. My silence, my stillness carried more weight than their cries. The room pulsed with chaos, but inside me there was only calm. Not joy, not triumph. Clarity. The truth had surfaced, illuminated not by my words, but by their own design turned back upon them. The collapse wasn't mine to carry anymore. Celine lay at their feet, the golden daughter dimmed under the same chandeliers that had crowned her minutes earlier. My parents hovered, their polished masks flickering with panic, and all around the witnesses multiplied. Dozens of eyes, dozens of cameras, all capturing the fracture. The hail perfection had cracked, and this time it wasn't me they could crop out. The ballroom had dissolved into chaos. Celine's collapse had cracked the performance wide open. Guests whispered in frantic tones, servers rushed to and fro, and my parents clung to their daughter with rehearsed desperation. They played their roles flawlessly, but the tremor in their eyes betrayed them. For once, their stage felt fragile. And then Jonah moved. He stepped forward from the shadows, his camera already connected to the projector that had earlier shown the slideshow of family perfection. The screen flickered once, twice, before settling into a clear image. The murmurs softened as heads turned, curiosity cutting through panic. And then the footage began. The room froze. On the giant screen under the same chandeliers that had crowned Celine, the truth unfolded frame by frame. First, my father's hand deliberate adjusting the fork beside my plate. The lens caught the tiny drop of white powder falling into the flute of champagne. Gasps rippled through the tables. The replay left no room for ambiguity. Next, me rising with the glass, stepping toward Celine's table. My voice steady but light carried through Jonah's microphone. "It looks like I may have taken your glass by mistake." The crowd watched as Celine laughed radiant and accepted the glass without hesitation, sliding hers toward me. They saw her drink deeply, performing for her admirers, and they saw me hold the untouched glass silent still. The whispers turned sharp. Was that? Phones lifted like a wave, guests recording the projection, framing the evidence from every angle. Then Aunt Clara rose. Her presence was quieter than Jonah's screen, but no less powerful. She stepped forward with deliberate grace, an envelope in her hand, the same one she had pressed into mine earlier. Her voice cut across the room, calm, but carrying the weight of something undeniable. "These," she said, holding the envelope high, "are scholarship letters, grant approvals, and pay stubs, all in Sophia's name. Proof that she paid her way, worked her hours, earned her ground." She placed the envelope on the table beside the projector, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. Every story told tonight about debt, about weakness, was a lie. A fabrication staged to elevate one daughter by erasing the other. Silence collapsed into sound. Gasps sharp and uncoordinated. Murmurs rushing through the tables like a current no one could stop. Guests craned their necks, some rising from their seats. Phones multiplied the glow of recording screens, turning the ballroom into a sea of tiny lenses. The truth wasn't confined to Jonah's footage anymore. It was spreading, multiplying, replicating in real time. My parents froze. My father's hand lingered on Selena's shoulder, stiff, his jaw locked. My mother's pearls trembled against her chest as her hand faltered. They knew the performance was slipping away, the script rewritten not by them, but by the evidence they could no longer crop or silence. And then the doors opened. Uniformed officers stepped inside, their presence sharp against the soft glow of the chandeliers. The hush deepened, the kind of silence that belongs not in galas, but in courtrooms. One officer scanned the room, another gestured toward the screen, still playing Jonah's footage. Guests shifted aside instinctively, some clutching their phones tighter already, narrating the scandal as it unfolded. For a breath, I didn't move. The clutch at my side felt heavier now, not a burden, but ballast. The proof was no longer mine alone. It lived on screens, in envelopes, in whispers, turning into declarations. I lifted my chin, meeting my parents' eyes across the room. My father's mask cracked first, a flicker of fear that betrayed the calm he'd curated for decades. My mother followed her smile, frozen too long, a porcelain mask threatening to shatter. And Celine still on the floor, her sequins catching the light, her glass knocked sideways, her performance undone by the very script they had written. The officers stepped forward, and for the first time that evening, it wasn't me under the spotlight. It was them. The room was still buzzing with shock, fragments of whispers skittering across the ballroom like broken glass. The footage had played, the envelope had been opened, the police had stepped through the gilded doors. Everything my family tried to choreograph had collapsed under the weight of evidence. And for the first time in years, I felt the heaviness in my chest begin to loosen. I walked to the long banquet table at the front of the room, the same one where my father had raised his glass, where Celine had basked under the chandeliers, where my mother had whispered poison disguised as affection. My heels clicked against the polished floor, steady, unhurried. No one tried to stop me. Every eye followed phones, still raised, recording, capturing the moment that could never be cropped out. I set my clutch down, unfastened the clasp, and pulled out the objects that had traveled with me through this night. First, the house keys, silver-worn, smooth by years of use, every groove etched with the sound of doors opening and closing on command. I laid them on the table. I won't live behind locks built to cage me. Next, the pendant, a small crest engraved with the Hale insignia, a family heirloom passed from parent to child like a brand more than a gift. I placed it beside the keys, the gold catching the light of the chandeliers. I won't wear a name that was used to erase me. Finally, the document Clara had tucked into the envelope, folded carefully but unmistakable, the official form removing my name from the family trust. their attempt to bind me into silence with money I never touched. I smoothed it flat on the linen. I won't belong to a ledger I never asked to join. The room was hushed, the kind of silence that vibrates louder than sound. I felt the weight of every lens, every guest, every witness who could no longer pretend not to see. My parents' faces were masks slipping fast, my father's knuckles white on the back of a chair, my mother's pearls trembling faintly at her throat. I looked at them one last time. I take back my name, my time, and my life. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Spoken steadily, deliberately, they carved themselves into the air like signatures pressed into wax. Final, unalterable. Then I turned. The doors opened before me, the hum of voices muffled as I stepped past them. Outside, the night air rushed in cool and bracing, carrying with it the salt edge of Puget Sound. The breeze lifted strands of my hair, brushed against my skin like a baptism. For the first time all night, I could breathe fully. The ballroom behind me still glittered, but its light no longer touched me. The performance had ended, the curtain dropped, and I had walked out intact. The proof was no longer hidden, it was illuminated. Their lies had been turned back upon them, their grip loosened, their silence broken. As I walked into the night, I thought of all the times I had burned myself small, folding inward, sacrificing pieces of myself just to keep them comfortable, to keep their image intact. And then the words rose inside me, sharp and certain, a lesson carved by fire. Don't set yourself on fire just to keep other people warm. I held on to that as the wind wrapped around me, carrying the salt of the sound, the echo of waves striking stone. Behind me, the Hale Crest lay abandoned on the white linen. Ahead of me, the night stretched open, unclaimed waiting. For once, I wasn't afraid of the emptiness. It wasn't absence. It was space. Mine. Have you ever been erased from your own family's picture, cropped out, overlooked, dismissed, comment 1 if yes, 0 if not? And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story.